Okay, now we're going to be talking about some material that's in a book I wrote called God's Crime Scene, but you don't have to have that book or master everything in that book because I'm not going to cover everything from that book in this course with you anyway. I'm just going to give you the four things that I think are most powerful when making a case from God. And really what I did in this book is kind of give you a presentation that is based on an analogy from death scenes. So what we're really kind of doing here is doing what I call Death Investigations 101. Death Investigations 101. So I'd imagine, now I'm offering this template to you so that when you're describing, I want you to get the one takeaway. So when you're describing why you believe God exists, and you can use any approach you want, but if you're going to use this approach, I just want to give you a simple template that you don't have to go through all these steps with people, but I'm going to go through it deeply with you so you can abbreviate it for others. That makes sense. So what I'm basically going to say is, look, we go to a lot of death scenes where we have a guy who's dead in the room, but we don't know why he's dead. This could be a murder, or it could be something other than a murder. You don't know. Not every death scene is a crime scene. So, for example, if I said, okay, all I got so far evidentially is a dead guy laying face down. That's all I have. Now, how do we approach these kinds of things, these kinds of scenes? Well, we have an approach where we examine two lists that begin with the letter E. One list is a list of evidences. The other list is a list of explanations. We just compare the two lists until we get to the most reasonable inference. This is called inductive reasoning. Now, here, so far, what we have on the list of evidences is just a dead guy laying face down. And you can explain dead guys laying face down in one of four ways. He may have died naturally, he may have died accidentally, or by way of suicide, or by way of homicide. We're trying to figure out, is this a homicide we need to stay and investigate, or are one of the other three explanations more reasonable? Well, if you look at this so far, dead guy laying face down, and I really can't cross out anything. If he had a heart attack, he would look like that. If he accidentally took too many pills, he would look like that. If he intentionally took too many pills, he would look like that. If I poisoned him with too many pills, he would look like that. So you see how all four explanations are still now equally reasonable? So let's change our scenario slightly. What if he's a dead guy and he's laying face down, but now instead of just laying face down on the floor, he's laying face down in a pool of his own blood center torso? This additional piece of evidence would change things, don't you think? If I add it to my list, for example, I'm trying to figure out, well, can I cross out anything now? I mean, I think I can cross out natural death. Now, look, I always say this, anything is possible, but I'm not interested in possible. I'm interested in reasonable. That's the standard, beyond a reasonable doubt, not beyond a possible doubt. I can't think of where you could reasonably bleed center torso without an injury. Naturally. I mean, is it possible? Maybe there's some rare medical condition, maybe, but it's not reasonable. I think it's reasonable for me to cross out this explanation, but I really can't cross out anything else until I roll him over and see what the injury is, right? So let me change the scenario again with you. Now he's a dead guy laying face down in his own blood, but he's actually got a single gunshot wound, torso. There's a pistol laying by his side. There is a casing of one expended shell. And this is an exit wound coming out of his back. Now, think about that. So we're going to list that now on our list of evidences. Now, can I cross out anything? No, I can't cross out anything because he could have accidentally shot himself. That would explain why it's an exit wound on his back. He could have committed suicide this way. You think, well, why did he commit suicide that way? Trust me, most of the suicides I have to go to, this guy's using drugs half the time. So I see all kinds of crazy suicides. This is still in the range of reasonable. And it's also reasonable it could be a homicide. Can't cross out anything. But what if laying next to his body, there happened to be a suicide note? And it's written in his own handwriting on paper I find elsewhere in the room. His is the only fingerprints, the only skin cell DNA transfer is his. It's his pen. It's a pen I find elsewhere in the room. His fingerprints are on the pen. Would this change things? I think it would. So let's put that on our list. Now, what can I cross out? I mean, it appears it's not an accidental. I mean, maybe he killed himself accidentally before he intended to kill himself, but it looks like the act is intentional. So I can cross out accidental. Now, for a lot of you, you're thinking, I think can you cross out? I mean, is this a homicide? This is a suicide, right? Because there's a suicide note. And a lot of you are thinking, well, yeah, couldn't somebody have forced him to write that suicide note? So yeah, there's some, you guys have been watching Criminal Minds too much, but that's okay. Let's just take a look and change our scenario one more level. What if instead of just this one single gunshot wound, he had multiple wounds in his upper back? And those wounds are not exit wounds. They were entry wounds. What if that paper and pen was not his skin cell transfer, not his fingerprints? An unknown fingerprint is found on the paper. It's not his handwriting. It's an unknown person's handwriting. What if there are bloody footprints leading out of the room? I think these things would change the scenario dramatically. Because now you've got, how do you shoot yourself multiple times in the back and then walk out of the room in your own blood? If we add this to our scenario, we now can reasonably cross out suicide. And that leaves us with the one most reasonable option. Okay, why did I show you all this to make a case for God's existence? Well, here's what we do in death scenes. In death scenes, we simply ask the question, can I explain everything that's in the room by staying in the room? If I can, it's not a homicide. It's simply an inside or outside the room investigation. Now, let me make it clear. Let's make this a scenario that's even more clearly inside or outside, like a box. He's in a box, and we're asking the question: can I explain everything that's in the box by staying in the box? If I can, it's not a homicide. So, for example, if that was his handwriting and it is his paper found elsewhere in the room, and it's his DNA on the paper and his fingerprints on the paper, his pen, well, now I can explain this by staying in the room. He's in the room. He's the one who wrote it. So the cause is in the room. And if that's a single gunshot wound, if it's a single gunshot wound now, right, and it's in his front torso, it's an entry wound in the front of his body, and that's his gun registered to him that he usually keeps in a safe in the corner of the room. Well, now I can explain the gun by staying in the room. And anyone can shoot themselves once by themselves without any help from inside the room. Now, the only cause I need is him inside that room. And now this is going to be one of these. It's clearly not going to be a natural, but it's not going to be a homicide. It's going to be an accidental or a suicide because I can stay in the room to explain everything in the room. Now, what if the cause is best explained from outside the room? Because that's not his fingerprints. That's not his paper or pen found anywhere else in the room. It's a foreign paper, foreign pen, foreign DNA, foreign fingerprints. I got to go out and figure out who wrote that now. I mean, what if that's not his gun? And his friends tell you that's not his gun. He's never owned a gun. He's afraid of guns. And sure enough, it's not registered to him. I got to figure out whose gun that is. And yeah, it's kind of hard to shoot yourself multiple times without some help from somebody outside the room. And I even have bloody footprints leading outside the room. So now the best explanation for the evidence I have in the room is a cause that's outside the room. It shifts to homicide. Why? Because we have evidence of an intruder. And intruders change everything. Intruders are what turn death scenes into crime scenes. And as a matter of fact, you might be curious as to why somebody would kill themselves or how they could die accidentally. But once you know you have an intruder, that sense of curiosity you have better turn into a sense of urgency because you have a short period of time in which to catch the killer. Now, why am I telling you all this? Because a case can be made for God's existence by treating the entire known universe as an inside or outside the room investigation. Imagine the room is not a death scene, but is instead the universe, the natural universe as we know it, all space, time, and matter. Can I explain everything that's in the room of the universe by staying in the room? Now, I'm not going to go through all of these 8 pieces of evidence, 8 truths about the universe, because that's a whole nother session, a whole nother kind of class. But we'll go through 4 of them, I think, with you, because it's the same 4 that I mentioned in the book Cold Case Christianity. So we'll talk about those to make a case, because we have to explain the nature of the universe. These 8 attributes of the universe have to be explained. And the only question is, can I explain them by staying in the room? Remember, all I have available in the room is space, time, matter, physics, and chemistry. If I can't explain it with space, time, matter, physics, and chemistry, then I have to go outside the natural realm. And if that's the case, we'd be basically doing another kind of investigation about intruders. Now, I think there are actually 4 kinds of evidence. 2 of these are cosmological, 2 of them are biological, 2 of them are mental, and 2 of them are moral. So we're looking at these 8 conditions of the universe, these 8 attributes, and asking, can I explain these 8 attributes with just space, time, matter, physics, and chemistry? In other words, staying inside the natural realm, or is the better explanation outside of space, time, matter, physics, and chemistry? Again, it's all about intruders. Only here, the intruder would have to span the entire cosmos. I remember when I first wrote God's Crime Scene, my publisher said, we can't call it that because it sounds like you're saying God committed a crime. But the reality is I'm just simply investigating the universe as though it's a crime scene to see if the best explanation is an inside or outside the room cause. Remember, we started off with this analogy. These evidences, this explanation, these explanations. Now we're going to flip the switch and we're going to look at the universe. These are the evidences that I think have to be explained in the universe. And we only got one or two ways to do it. We can stay inside the room and use unguided natural forces, space-time, matter, physics, and chemistry, or we could jump outside for a guided process involving a supernatural deity or supernatural force, cause, whatever you want to call it. And what we're going to do is just focus first of all on the first cause, the first characteristic of the universe. We are in a universe that has a beginning. I had a case a number of years ago where there was a piece of foam left at the crime scene, and we had to ask this question right next to the victim's body. Where did this foam come from? We just needed to figure out. We knew it didn't belong to the victim and didn't belong to the crime scene, so we suspected it belonged to the suspect. But that would mean we got to figure out how he left it there. Well, it turns out he left it there because his boot had a piece of foam in the cuff of the boot, and this piece of foam fell out of the cuff when he was doing the murder. Left it unlucky for him. Now, there are three kinds of questions you have of evidence at crime scenes. The first kind of question is a question, what I call a question of origination. And that really comes down to how long has this been here? Has it always been here? If it's always been part of the crime scene, there's no reason to look at it evidentially because it's always been part of the crime scene. On the other hand, if it just came into being at the point of the crime, it's going to be of value to us. The second question, of course, though, is how did this piece of evidence, get here? What's the cause? Causation. Who caused the evidence to appear in the scene in the first place? Maybe it came from the victim. Maybe it came from the suspect. It doesn't matter. The third piece is explanation. Why did the evidence appear at the scene? Well, it turns out that in this case, this is a guy who never untied his boots. He would just kick them off. And he eventually wore out the rear heel cuff where the foam was located. The stitching eventually came undone. So by the time he did this murder, it was on the verge of popping out. And he bent down to take some money from her purse, and that's when the foam popped out of his boot. So now I had a way of explaining how the foam got there, what caused it, him bending down, and what's the best explanation. He's the best explanation. This is how we ultimately made the case against him. It's a Dateline case. You can look it up. It's called the Night Before Halloween. That's what it's called, the Night Before Halloween. Okay. All that being said, the first question is a big one when it comes to the universe. We have to ask the question, like, how did the foam get here? When did it get here? How long has it been here? That's a good question to ask. And I think that there are many lines of scientific evidence that demonstrate that we are in a universe that has not been here forever. We're in a universe that had a beginning. And that creates a problem. And a lot of atheists already agree this is the case, the nature of the universe. Alexander Vilenkin, for example, says that with the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. We're not in a universe that's been here forever. There's no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. And even Roger Penrose says, yeah, almost everyone now believes that the universe, in time itself, we'll talk about that, had a beginning at the Big Bang. Oh, there's that word, Big Bang. A lot of us as Christians don't like that word, Big Bang. The idea that everything came into being from nothing, a bang, right? A period of immense expansion in which everything, all space, time, and matter, leaps into existence from nothing. We call this the Big Bang. Now, that word, I know, for a lot of Christians, kind of seems like they're saying that, oh, yeah, I can explain the beginning of the universe from some other cause other than God. But I don't think the Big Bang actually does that at all. I think the Big Bang is actually evidence that points to a creator, because think about it. Big bangs, all big bangs require big bangers. And a big bang is going to require a big banger. The only question is, what is the banger? Is the banger going to be some non-spatial? It's going to have to be something outside of space, time, and matter, right? If we're saying that all space, time, and matter, and that is the standard of cosmological argument, the standard cosmological model from science is that all space, time, and matter came into existence from nothing. That means the cause cannot be space, time, or matter. It's got to be true nothing. It's going to be something non-spatial, non-material, and atemporal. So let's just take a look at this idea of the Big Bang theory. This is the standard cosmological model amongst physicists because there are lots of alternatives, but they don't hold the kind of weight, evidentially, that this model holds. And when I say the Big Bang Theory, just understand what I'm saying. I'm saying that everything, all space, time, and matter, came into existence from nothing. Okay. I'm not saying anything else. And so this idea that this is incompatible with our view as Christian is not necessarily true. If this is all I mean by the Big Bang, that all space, time, and matter came into existence from nothing. Here's what I'm not saying, though, by the way. What I'm not saying is that if I believe that the Big Bang Theory explains something true about the universe, does not mean that I somehow believe in the theory of evolution, because I don't. There's lots of people who believe in the Big Bang but deny the evolutionary theories, or believe in evolutionary theory but deny the Big Bang as a cosmological model. Right? This deals with how things change once they come into place. We're talking about Big Bang Theory. Also, what I'm not saying by somebody who says that I could look at the value of the Big Bang Theory is I'm not saying that I embrace or reject any particular age of the universe. You could think that the age of the universe is very ancient or that the universe is very young. It wouldn't matter to me, because in the end, I am only making one truth claim about the Big Bang important for us as Christians. And that's that people, by the way, people argue about the age of the universe, even amongst atheists. The point I'm trying to make here, though, is that the Big Bang Theory, for our purposes, especially in making the case to others and for evangelism, is that all space, time, and matter came into existence from nothing. And that shouldn't be controversial because the science supports this. And there is evidence under a number of different lines of evidence in completely different categories with completely different thinkers and completely different kinds of thinkers, all of whom agree that the universe has to have a finite, it has to have a beginning point. So I want to cover some of this evidence with you deeply, although I don't think you're going to have to cover this. I just want you to have a grasp of it in your own mind in case you encounter an objection. So what is the evidence for the Big Bang? Well, there's a couple of things. Number one, this is from astrophysicist Robert Jastrow. He talks about this in a book called God and the Astronomers, in which he talks about the second law of thermodynamics. Now, this second law of thermodynamics, as you and I both know it, basically, I'll just write it out for you. It's the law of increased entropy. It basically states that while the quantity of energy within a closed, isolated system like the universe remains the same, the amount of usable energy deteriorates gradually over time. In other words, usable energy is lost. And as it's lost, irretrievably, disorganization occurs, randomness occurs, chaos increases. Look, things change over time and they age over time. Why? Because of the second law of thermodynamics. Here's a way to illustrate it for anybody. If you were to walk into a room and you found this toy car rolling around on the ground, this wind-up toy, what's the second thing you're going to look for? It's going to be the person who wound it up and started it, right? Because you know this car cannot have been running forever. At some point, it's going to run out, and you can see it's going to run out. It had a beginning point in which it was tightly wound. And eventually, this usable energy unwinds and the car comes to a stop. This is the nature of our universe, is that it is eventually approaching a heat death. And this is why we can go back in time and say, well, yeah, if it's slowly unwinding, there must have been a time in the very beginning when it was completely wound. And this is the nature of what the second law is telling us about the energy in the universe. And that means that there has to be a beginning point at which energy is maximized and from which energy dissipates, usable energy dissipates. So the second law of thermodynamics is actually an evidence for the beginning of the universe. But also we see that the universe is expanding. This was discovered by a couple of thinkers, mathematicians, and astronomers. Most notably, Edwin Hubble probably gets credit for this most, for the law of redshift. And this is when you look at galaxies or nebula or stars in the universe through your telescope, and you measure the light spectra coming from that particular cluster or galaxy or nebula, whatever it is, you will see that if the source is moving towards you, you'll see that the light will shift toward blue. But if it is moving away from you, it shifts toward red. It becomes redder as it moves away from you. Now, we're seeing this in the universe. We're seeing that things are shifting red. which means that things are moving away from each other. That means the universe is expanding. Kind of like if you can imagine, if I was to draw little galaxies on this balloon, as I blow the balloon up, the galaxies move further and further away from each other. This does not mean that you might have the perception that you're in the center of the universe because everything's moving away from you, but you can see that anywhere you are on that balloon, it's going to appear that everything else is moving away from you. It does not mean that you're the center of it, of course. But if I was to rewind that, the expansion of the universe simply demonstrates that at some point in the distant past, everything was at a point from which it began to expand. The expanding universe is a second piece of evidence that demonstrates we are in a universe that had a beginning from which the expansion began. So there's two pieces of evidence. Let me give you a third. Radiation echo. This was discovered by Arnold Penzias and Robert Wilson back in the 70s when they were built this satellite dish to measure, to look at the stars, and they kept on getting this noise. This they thought it was basically degradation of the dish. They thought maybe it was bird poop on the dish. They had all kinds of theories about how to get rid of this background noise, until they finally realized, you know what? This is, by the way, what they look like today, or in the last about 8 years ago. And this has now been measured. It turns out it's not an artifact of the dish. It's actually noise they're measuring in the universe. It's called radiation echo. We've now also measured it with satellites. And we can see, we launched a satellite in the 80s to confirm this. And if you measure it, it looks like this across the universe. There's this kind of uniform echo of radiation. Let me give you an analogy that might be helpful. You know, we do these entries as a SWAT team where you'll come in, you have a barricaded suspect, he's in a room, and you know you got to get in the room. So you assemble your team outside the room. But before you go in, you send someone around the other side and they take a flashbang. Flashbang does what it says it does. It flashes and it bangs. They pull the clip, they throw it in the room, and once they throw it in the room, it detonates. It is super loud, super bright. Stuff blows up everywhere. It's kind of like a non-lethal grenade. But what happens is it fills the room with light and noise and heat, and then we just enter in behind them. It's a distraction device. We throw it in on one side, we enter in from the other side. And the chaos that it causes takes a few seconds to subside. That flashbang leaves a residue, both a noise residue, a light, blinds you for a while, and then you're able to enter in behind them. Well, we're seeing a flashbang of sorts in the universe. The universe comes into existence through an expansive moment in the distant past and leaves in its wake a radiation echo of noise, of energy, and we can still record it. We can measure it. This radiation echo is just further evidence that an explosive moment, an expansive moment, I should say, begins the universe. It's just another piece of evidence. It's the third piece of evidence in the evidence set that demonstrates the universe has a beginning. I'll give you one more just for the sake of giggles, and that is the philosophy of infinite regress. And here's what this one comes down to. If you had a racetrack and I told all of you as police recruits to line up at the starting line, and I want you to run down the track, you're going to run toward the finish line. And I put you in the blocks, only instead, imagine this finish line is different. It's not going to curve like this. Instead, this finish line goes off all the way through the woods infinitely. It just goes on. Imagine it can possibly be the case. It's just an infinite racetrack. You're at the starting line. Okay, get your blocks in place. You're ready to go. Get your feet in the blocks. You're ready to race. And before you take off, before I fire the pistol to start the race, I say, oh, stop. I want you to move your blocks back 6 inches. You're like, what? Yeah, just do it. So you move your blocks back 6 inches and you're getting ready to start again. But before you start, I tell you, stop. I'm going to move back 6 more inches. And every time you're just about to start, I tell you instead to move your blocks back 6 inches. Okay, you do this not just once, not just twice, not just 5 times. You do it an infinite number of times. I never let you start. I simply move the start back infinitely. Are you ever going to get to the finish line? No, because without a beginning, you can't finish the race. If the beginning is not fixed, you'll never get to the end. Why does this matter? Because without a beginning of time, if time doesn't have a beginning, you can't get to the finish line that we call today. The fact that we are at today means that there must be a beginning to time. I know that sounds rather heady, but that's the idea. Now, I've only described 4 of these evidences. I described 6 in the book, God's Crime Scene, but I just want you to see that this is the cumulative case that people put together from a number of disciplines to demonstrate that the universe has a beginning. And this isn't my case as a Christian. This is the case that atheists make for the beginning of the universe. We are in a universe that has a beginning.